Hey everybody, this is LMP Games, and welcome back to episode 8, our 8th episode already, of our RPG Maker MP plugin development tutorial series. So, over the course of this series, we've gone over a bunch of different stuff. Yes, this is kind of the recap thing that I said we're going to do every few episodes. We've talked about RPG Maker, the history of it, what specifically gone into RPG Maker MV's editor and talked about the stuff in there. That was episode 2. Episode 3 we talked about JavaScript, went through some really basic stuff about JavaScript, and then also some not so basic stuff. That's kind of get you introduced to the language if you haven't used it before, and get you ready to kind of start working with plugin coding. And then for episodes 4, 5, and 6, we're all about creating a single plugin. We built that plugin and enhanced it over a couple different episodes because I wanted to ease you into developing a plugin, seeing the different stages and phases, and how new features can be implemented, and by doing so, having to update the existing features to accommodate the new stuff you want to add in, right? That whole process was about easing you into that, showing you each step, and then also the things that we talked about that you learned along the way to kind of allow you to absorb those and think about them and use them on like JS Fiddle, or do some of the tutorials about those kinds of things outside of this video series. Then in episode 7 we talked about the core plugin and documentation as well, and how that would work. We are going to do documentation for probably this and the next plugin, but then after that I'm not going to do that on video because that'll take too much time for the scale of the plugins at that point. And likewise, every episode now is going to be a new plugin. We're not going to be doing one plugin over several episodes. Every episode will be a new plugin. And the idea is that we'll be adding in new stuff, talking about new things in each episode that are related to still the stuff that we've gone over, but also then taking that stuff to the next step up in terms of like complexity and adding in new stuff along the way, talking about different things, different components of plugins and stuff like that. Like, for example, in this episode, well, first, skip back a little bit. Let's talk about what this series is about too. So if you're just tuning in for the first time to one of these episodes, this series is about teaching how to develop plugins for RPG Maker MV. What's taught here can be somewhat applied to MZ as well, which is the next version of RPG Maker after MV. Both of them use JavaScript for the engine language, and plugins are written in JavaScript. The earlier versions of RPG Maker, VXAce, VX, XP, that have scripting are using Ruby, so this doesn't apply to those. But you could learn how to write Ruby if you wanted to, and then also make plugins and scripts for those. This stuff might be applicable to 2003, RPG Maker 2003. I have heard that there's somebody working on potentially a injectable that will allow you to write JavaScript code for RPG Maker 2K3. There already is kind of one for C++ coding. That will be kind of a huge thing because RPG Maker 2003 on its own does not support any kind of coding or custom coding at all. So that'll be interesting too. But what this series is about teaching that, and here are some of kind of the ground, I don't want to say ground rules, but some of the things to keep in mind. First and foremost, the series is designed to hopefully be paced enough, slow enough, and paced content-wise properly for those who have little to no experience with working with JavaScript or programming to kind of go through and learn that. Obviously, if you've worked with RPG Maker and JavaScript before, you'll be, this series will be a lot more helpful to you, I think, in terms of, you won't have to do a lot of things on your own to learn stuff, the stuff we talk about, because you already will know some of it. And you'll get more out of it in terms of like, oh, this is how I would do this, and then, you would like think about something that happens normally in the game, or in the engine when you are working on stuff like, how does battle work? How does that begin? How do you open up a menu? That kind of stuff. And you'll get more out of like, oh, here's how that menu is created, kind of thing. Than somebody that's just brand new, hasn't worked with either JavaScript or RPG Maker, and is learning everything from scratch, essentially. And has to kind of put in a lot, maybe not a lot more work, but extra work as opposed to what somebody experienced would have to. That's kind of the intention, is that I give you the kind of the roadblocks to build the road that you're going to use to learn this stuff, and it's up to you to make that road and then travel down it. So to that end, these plugins we're making are, you can just pretty much ignore what they are, because they don't have any real purpose. The plugins are not the point. The point is the process. So a lot of the plugins we'll be making will be either not quite complete or will be impractical. They won't have any real practical value. Like the dialog selector plugin, with some extra modifications and changes, could be a practical plugin to use, but as it is currently coded after episode 6, it's not really that practical. Similarly, this plugin will also not be practical to use, but with some extra modifications could be. And that's going to be a common theme throughout all these plugins we'll be making, probably until like the last couple. The last couple, 2 or 3, will actually be full-fledged plugins that will be practical in terms of usage. Because we're going to go through and make an actual plugin for those episodes to kind of show the entirety of the process, as opposed to up to the specific point where I want those plugins to stop. The other thing about this is that, because I'm emphasizing the learning portion of this process, this tutorial series, there'll be times that I use certain things that probably aren't the best solutions to use for those situations. And most of the time it's intentional to showcase some kind of new topic that I want to bring into the discussion. Like today we're going to be talking about note tags, how to process note tags. We're going to be actually building out the actual core plugin that we're going to be using throughout the rest of the plugin series, and we'll talk about eval and what that does and how it works. And we're going to get into also doing some more complex aliasing of functions and modification of existing RPG Maker functions through that, and introducing some of the other RPG Maker coding files where you'll need to kind of get familiar with in order to find stuff as you're working on plugins. So we're going to be introducing new topics, new stuff. Hopefully it's not too much, but the idea is that I'm going to ramp it up a bit. So every video from here on out, every episode from here on out is going to have a little bit more, maybe a little more complexity, a little bit more stuff that's new. Just to kind of push you a bit. And again, hopefully it's not too much. But again, the videos are not intended to be a one-time viewing experience. They're meant to be watched multiple times so you understand everything thoroughly. And pick up on all the nuances. Because what is intended is you're going to watch this once, you're going to go, okay, here's what I think. Going to go mess around with some stuff. then once you kind of get a better understanding of the things we talked about, you come back, watch it again, and you get you're like, oh, this is what this is actually doing. And then, like, well, if this is true, then shouldn't we do this kind of thing? And then as we're going, like, through the first episodes 4, 5, and 6, the intention of having that split apart was that as you work through them and do that process, you start thinking about, well, how could, what's this going to become, or how are we going to do this kind of thing on the next one to further enhance the system, the feature that we're creating with the plugin. So it's intended that you're going to be watching these videos at least twice, probably more. You're going to be doing a lot of fiddling around in JS Fiddle and doing other tutorials and things about the same kind of topics we're talking about, and kind of getting the full, complete understanding of those topics by doing that. If you're new or aren't familiar with the stuff we're talking about. In addition to all that as well, a lot of the coding we'll be doing in these plugins will not be optimal coding. I'm going to try and keep the code as clean as possible and as consistent as possible between all the plugins. That might necessitate doing things that are a little bit strange or not as performant as some other solution could be. One of the huge focuses, aside from teaching the stuff in this series, is teaching about and explaining and showing how to write clean and readable code, and why code needs to be done that way, written that way, and why it needs to be consistent across all the stuff you're doing that's related to each other. So, like, all the plugins that you make should have a consistent style, and why that's important, especially when you start bringing in things like a core plugin into the picture, and like how that should work across all of your plugins, and kind of making the persuasive argument why things should be done in certain ways, as opposed to others. So that's what you can expect from this series. So what we'll be doing today is we're going to be starting up a new plugin. What we're going to be doing with it is we're going to be creating a plugin that gives weapons bonuses. It's going to be pretty simplistic. We're not going to go too crazy on it because this is meant to introduce some pretty big topics, so I want to keep the actual plugin pretty chill. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be allowing a weapon to multiply its damage. So essentially what will happen is you'll make an attack with the weapon, and then that attack, whether it's a skill or a normal attack, is going to have the damage modified by a value you're going to put on. We're going to be putting in the note tag or the note box of the weapon. So we're going to be creating a note tag. We're going to be parsing the note tag in the core plugin into a object that will store the plugin data for weapons specifically. So we're not going to be putting this data into the database data. We'll be storing it separately, but it will still be indexed to the ID of the weapon. So it'll essentially be a copy of the weapon database for the weapons that are part of the plugin. But it will only be the data for the plugin that's relevant to the plugin. It won't be all the database data there. And then what we'll have to do is we'll have to find the ID of the weapon that the player, or weapons, if the player is dual wielding, that the player is using. And actually, I think in terms of dual wield, it's actually 2 attacks, so it should be each individual attack. Yeah, no. So I think what I have planned should work for every. Work for both single-wielded, single and dual-wielded weapons. But you essentially get the ID from the data from the class that handles doing the attacking, and then we get the plugin data and use that to modify the damage. So we're going to be doing the plugin. We're doing the core plugin. We're going to be actually creating the plugin for real, the core plugin for real. We'll be setting up a note tag, doing note tag processing, talking about the eval statements and how that works, and we'll be showing you some of the internal stuff for the engine and where to find it and how to modify it properly. And in what cases you would just make changes directly to the existing functions and when you wouldn't, and those are very specific instances. And why you normally might not want, why you would normally not want to do that unless you have to. But first, we have to. I've already done some of the setup. We got the folder ready. I've got the project RPG Maker project ready. We need to create the repository and push it up to GitHub though. So let's go ahead and initialize the Git repository in our. Actually, let's go ahead and first make the workspace file. And then we'll initialize the repository. Yeah. Okay. And we're going to go ahead and hit this button to create the repository in the GitHub. My GitHub account. That's fine, because we don't have anything to push yet. So we're going to create a couple files here. So we want to make the README, so we'll start with that. We want the documentation file. So plug in a design doc, we'll call it. And then we want the plugin file itself. So what do we actually need to look this up? We called this thing tutorial plugin. Okay, not plugin tutorial. So tutorial plugin. I'll change the view size here in a second. 3, because technically this is plugin 3. Weapon bonuses. Okay. Now let me go do this real fast. Control plus equals. Okay. All right. Then we're gonna go do Control Shift tilde. Okay. Then we're going to set up our master branch. So we're going to go git add all files. Okay. Now let's go ahead and set up our README real quick. Initial README for tutorial. Oh, we need one more file actually. We need the core plugin as well. Okay, so here are our files. Let's go ahead and set up our design doc. So, user stories. So we're going to say, as a developer, I would like to be able to give certain weapons a bonus to the damage that they do on attack. This damage bonus should be applied to both. Should be able to be applied. We should be able. Any or all. So any or all, meaning that we're going to be creating a setting that we're going to be using to make this apply to specific types of skills or to all skills. So, like for example, if you want to create a magic staff or a rod or something that only should add damage to spells, then we're going to be able to tell the plugin what type of damage or what type of skill that that weapon should be boosting. We'll be doing that through the plugin, through the note tag. So requirements read to plugin, plugin settings. So let's go ahead and get rid of the plugin settings here because they're going to have to change these now. So what should the plugin settings be for this? I don't think we really need too many, right? Maybe just to enable and disable, potentially. I usually put a way to enable and disable my plugins in every plugin, just in case there's some situation where the developer wants to disable the system from in-game for some story-related reason or something like that, right? You should always give the developer the opportunity to turn it off if they want to from in-game. Or to have it turned off at the start of the game and then enable it at some point when they need it. So, this is going to be that. So it'll be true or false. Do the type, and the description will be allows for the system to and I think that might be the only plugin setting we really need. Everything else is going to be done in the note tag, so we don't really need to handle too many of these. So enable weapon bonuses. Actually, yeah, enable weapon bonuses. Let's keep it consistent. Boolean true false allows the weapon bonus, weapon damage bonus through a plugin command. We don't need this. Script calls. I'm gonna say we're not going to have any script calls for this one, so none. Note tag. Weapon. Okay, so what are our note tag attributes going to be? Well, we need to have the bonus, so the multiplicator to apply. So it's called bonus, and this is going to be a float. Or we can call it float, or we can call it a decimal. It's actually, decimal is the name of the actual type in JavaScript, so we'll use decimal. It can be positive or negative. And then we need one that says skill type. So it's an integer. Will be the value type of this, so number, and ID for the skill type that this bonus should apply to. And we're going to say if 0 is used, because I believe these are also 0 indexed, or 1 indexed rather. Okay, how should this be used? So how should the plugin be used? Note tags are added to the note boxes. The weapons that should be used by the system. On attack, damage, calculated damage. Actually, what we're going to say is going to be a string. Actually, let's make, so we have the bonus. One more thing we need here. We need one more thing. So the reason why I want to put this formula in here is because, so we could just put the bonus, right? And just have the value there and then use that in the code. Using the formula, though, would allows you to give the developer a bit more control if they want to. Like, for example, they might be able to, if you give them the option of making a formula, they'll be able to take the participants in the attack action and build out this bonus formula to be a little more complex if they wanted to. Like, they could look at the attacker's attack strength, defender's defense, and do some extra modifications to the damage based on those, in addition to using the bonus. So it gives you a little more control to do things. So I'll be doing that. So ID skill used. Okay. On attack, calculated damage is modified using the bonus and bonus formula. For the applicable skill types configured. Okay. Edge cases. So, what are the edge cases for this? So, bonus formula is invalid or contains invalid variable names. Let me go back really fast here and see how I structured this. Problem and handling. Gotcha. That's what I was looking for. So, problem. So the problem is going to be, this will cause the game to crash, as eval expects the information in a string to be present and properly formatted. So what is how do we handle it? Wrap the, we'll be talking about try catches too, actually. That's something else I forgot to mention earlier. Wrap the eval statements in a try catch. On failure, use unmodified damage. So, and then I guess also that would the other thing would be the skill type configuration. Invalid skill type ID is used. Problem. If the skill type ID is not valid, this might cause crashes, or at the very least would result in aberrant behaviors. Because if we have a skill type that's not found, then what will happen is that the damage will essentially be won't be calculated. So there's a potential that it could end up, nulling out the damage. It could throw out some nans, not a number. Sometimes when you try and convert a number that's something that's not a number, like just a string into a number, it'll become a nan, not a number. Might be undefined, might be null. There's a bunch of different things that could happen with that. So we need to handle that by check if the ID exists, and if not, use the unmodified damage. So in both these cases, we're going to have a fallback that's going to just use the damage that would have otherwise been caused without modifying it. And we're going to have the errors fail silently, which means, so to fail silently means that you allow the code to fail, but in a way that's not going to cause the program to crash, and then you can also do reporting based on that. So like on a try-catch, if you have a problem, the code is, you try to execute the code. If it runs into a problem, the issue is caught, try and catch. And then in the catch, you can essentially like print out something to the console or to a log file or something, and say, oh, during this process, this happened, this error happened, and this particular thing couldn't be done. So the code can then continue running by using the finally keyword, which essentially is the final step in a try-catch. And you can essentially finally say, okay, this stuff didn't work, so we want to use this value instead. Or we want to do this specific thing instead. And so you catch the error so it doesn't cause the program to crash. You log it silently, and then you display an error to the user, potentially, depending on your application. In our case, it's always going to go into the console. And then you, after all that is done, you then determine what's going to happen with this particular bit of code that's failed and what should happen. In this case, we're going to say, well, use the unmodified damage and return that, because we have to give the attack processing the damage to then do the damage to the target that should be done. There should not be any damage done. So those are our edge cases. It doesn't seem like a lot, but it actually is a lot, because we're going to get doing some, a lot of coding, because we have to do two plugins essentially: the core plugin now, the actual plugin, and then we have to do a bunch of stuff that we need to handle. So you'll see as we get into it. It seems like it's not that much, but it actually kind of is. That's the documentation there, so let's go ahead and save that. And then we're going to go ahead and push all this stuff up. We'd add the we need to add the tracking for the core plugin. So we're going to do this again. And then we're going to do a commit. So this is going to be, we'll say master initial plugin files. Okay, and then we'll do a git push. Sent upstream origin master. Alright, and if we go over to the repository, we should see that we have that here now. We have the files. Good. We have the master branch. Alright, so we need to make the working branch. Let's go ahead and do that real quick. Or checkout, rather. And then we're going to make the version 1 branch. And then we're going to make the actual feature branch. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to handle the core plugin. So that's what will be going into our first branch here. So for the core plugin, we don't really need too much. We do need the, I'm gonna cheat a little bit here because I can. We're gonna go back to core plugin from the I need to unbind Atom from JS files. We're going to come back over here. I'm just going to grab this, copy that in there. We'll get rid of this parameter because we don't really need it. Okay. I'm going to add the help here, and we'll fill that in later with the link. Okay. So, and I'm also going to open up my actual core plugin that I have for my game, so I have something to kind of work from. I don't think we did any actual work on the plugin. We were just going over my core plugin on the last episode to kind of show that. So let me go and open up this core plugin. There we go. Okay, bring this over here. Okay, so first thing first, we have to define the name of the core plugin, the parameter name, the variable name that will store everything for the plugin. In this case, we're just going to say tutorial core plugin. Or we'll say tutorial core. That'll be a var equals an object. And then we want to have a couple things. So we want to have params. So var to I just realized that my plugin has is actually the name for the core plugins not correct. It's capitals. It's like almost class casing, actually, is what it is. I'll need to fix that. So tutorial core dot params, or not core params. Okay. Or not var, just that. So what that's going to be used for is loading the parameters for the core plugin. If we have them, we don't, but we're still going to put it in because at some point we might. So we're going to put in a thing here. We're going to call this core plugin params. No. Do that. And then we're going to do tutorial core dot core params equals plugin manager dot yeah, I guess that's how we're doing this. Actually, okay, let's say for example, because actually we're not going to do this part yet. But let's say for example you had like if we had in there before this thing. Let me copy it back over. Let's say we had this param, right? And we want to add this param to our code down here to be used. So what we would do is we have core params, and we would say dot let's see, space between icon and name. So we call this icon space. Add icon space. Then we do an equals here, and then we would have plugin manager. If we had more than one plugin, we wouldn't do it this way. We'd store the plugin manager data in a variable, and then use that variable to add stuff in. But since we have just one here, the hypothetical thing here, we're just going to do it this way. So dot parameters. I can type parameters. Holy crap! And then would be add space between icon and name equals true. So what will happen is now is we'll have a parameter, a property instead of core params, which is itself a property instead of tutorial core. That is called add icon space, and it'll be true or false. And if it's true, then we would essentially use this in any place where we need to check to see if it's true, to see whether or not we want to put a space between an icon and the name for an object. So like for an item or weapon, armor, something that has an icon associated with it in the database. That's how this would work. But since we don't have any parameters yet that will be used for the core plugin itself, we're not going to do that part of it. But that's what I was starting to do. But we don't need that right now. So next section we need to do is going to be the core plugin settings. Core plugin settings. And again, we don't really need these just yet, but we're going to put it in because we will eventually probably need them. So we're going to say tutorial core dot core settings equals an object. And to kind of show you what I do for mine. We then have a thing. Well, actually, we'll have to do the plugins one. But I have like the plugins one, and then I thought there was another. I'm thinking of plugin settings, I guess. No, I thought I had some other ones. Where are these other ones at? Things like the. Okay, I think I might need to add these back in then. So I think I got rid of these by accident. Oh no, they're there. They're underneath common settings. So actually what I would want to do then is... Okay, settings. Common settings. In other words, common to the plugins. And then we have, these are specifically settings for the core plugin. Okay, gotcha. I haven't looked at this in quite a while, and I have forgotten how I had this set up. I like to keep things very separated if they're not the same. Like, you could say that those other settings technically could go into this, but again, I'm going to keep these very separated. So, what this plugin setting is going to do it's going to store a list of our plugins that we have. So we're going to put all of our plugins in here that we have so far. So the dialog selector and the this one, the weapon bonuses. Because then we can check to see if they're installed, and if we need to do anything specific with the core plugin in relation to those, we can check if they're installed and do that thing. In this case, like, we're going to use that to determine whether or not we're going to process the weapon note tag data. Because if you don't have the plugin installed, there's no real reason to do that. And if you don't do that check, this will always process the data, because we're going to be building in the data processing into the core plugin. Now, the reason why we want to do that for is because, and I explained this in the last episode as well, is that if you have multiple plugins that are processing over the database data, database data can be pretty large, especially for a large game. You could have, hundreds of skills. You could have, dozens to hundreds of weapons. You could have thousands of enemies. And if you have data you're processing in those objects in multiple plugins, it's going to iterate over all those objects, all the data in those objects multiple times. So what's going to happen is you'll have one plugin that'll go through, load all the data, grab its data. Next plugin will load in, run through all the data, grab what it needs from the data, so on and so forth until everything loads. That's going to cause a slowdown in loading, right? Because it's going to be looping over all the data that is in the database for the stuff that you need. So like classes, actors, weapons, armor, items, skills, stats effects, enemies, troops, all that stuff. Actually, I don't know if troops has a note tag box or not. I don't think it actually made troops might not. but all the other stuff does. So what the core plugin allows you to do is say, well, I have these plugins installed. These plugins have data on these objects. I want to process the data for this object and then extract all the data needed for these plugins and store it in the data, the plugin note tag data property we're going to create so that the plugins can access it when they need it. So we're taking the processing, we're offloading it from the plugins into the core plugin, so all the processing, all the loading, all the iterating over the data is all done within the core plugin. It's done once for every plugin that needs that particular object, because it all happens at the same time if the plugin is enabled and installed. Installed and enabled, turned on. And that way, that once the core plugin has loaded, all that is there, the other plugins can just load and do what they want to do. And we don't have to wait for things to iterate over all the data multiple times, potentially. So it's just a really good solution to handle processing data from the database like that. So, is this a list of objects? Yeah. Okay. So, and it's named and installed, right? Yeah. So we're going to use the proper casing and everything. So name, so the first plugin name is going to be, and it's the full name, yeah. So it's going to be tutorial plugin 1_dialog selector installed false. Because you can't assume anything is installed, you have to assume it's not. So you have to make it false. And you should assume that for any kind of options you're putting in to be able to enable or disable that rely on other plugins, you have to assume that they're always not going to have them. Because if they don't have them and you assume they will, the plugin's going to crash because they won't have what they need. So everything that's any kind of like additional features from like a plugin extension that you write for another plugin, anything that's a third-party plugin you're using to do certain things, if they're installed, you always have to make those options be false because you can never assume that they have them. It's up to the developer to turn them on if they need them. It's something that a lot of plugin developers don't do, and they need to because it's just proper etiquette, in my opinion. Never assume they're using something unless they actually are using it. Because I can't tell you the number of times I've gotten a plugin, been like, okay, let's use this thing, go and load it up in a project file, run the playtest, and it crashes because there's some setting turned on that requires you to have another plugin. The information about that plugin doesn't tell you that you need it because it says it's an optional thing, but it's turned on by default, so it causes the plugin to crash by default. There's the problem. And again, these names should be the actual plugin file names so that they can be found properly. Because we're going to be using the plugin manager to handle this stuff. Okay, so there's that. Let me grab this back up here. So I was using that over here. Okay, so we've got our plugins that we have currently supported in our core plugin defined. Now we need to do the plugin settings. So tutorial core.plugin settings. This is going to be a object or a list? An object. Okay. And then we're going to be putting in other objects in there in the form of the plugins. So like we'll have like one in here for, you know, if we had stuff we need to use in this for dialog selector and weapon bonuses, we'd have those names as properties. So we'd say dialog selector, weapon bonuses, and then the actual settings in that, and the object that contains. For right now, we don't need to do anything with that. Next, we need to set up the plugin parameters. So this is going to be where we're going to store every plugin's parameters, which we'll need to do for like the dialog selector. We might do a extra video just to cover that I might release at some point. The essentially converting the dialog selector plugin to use the core plugin, because we do need to do that at some point. And it'd be good to see the process of taking an old plugin and converting it to work with something new, the new kind of system paradigm or something like that. It'd be good for you to have that kind of exposure to that process. So tutorial core.plugin params equals, and then we'll essentially fill that in from each plugin. Then what do we have? Plugin data. So this is data specific to the plugin. I'm going to add this because, again, we're going to need it eventually, but we're not going to use that for this plugin. This is for stuff that's not database data. So like if you have data stored in, like for example, the dialog selector plugin, the dialog map, you know, the map data variable that stores all the dialog mapping to the entity, to the map the entity is in. That whole thing that we configure in the plugin settings would go into this plugin data property inside of a property for the dialog selector inside of it. Okay, then after that comes the database data. So plugin database data. So this is if you're going to create. So what I would use this for, and what I actually use this for in mine, is to store new database records, right? So instead of storing that data within the game's data, you know, the engine's database variables, if I'm creating a new record for a database object, I'm storing it here instead. It kind of separates the two and makes it a little more difficult to manage in some cases. But actually, in this case, I think I might also be copying it. So what I think I'm actually really using this for is to store the plugin data in here for saving, I think, purposes, potentially. Or I might not even be using them at all now at this point. I'm not really sure. So I'm going to put this in, but you probably won't use it in any of the plugins we're doing. Most likely, but you never know. So plugin, database data. These might be used specifically for loading too, potentially too. I have it says here for storing new database records created in game, but that could mean anything really. So I'm not going to put that specific thing there, but we have tutorial core.plugin database data, and then we have notetag data after it, which we will be using in this plugin. Okay. And for this one, we're going to go ahead and put in all the types that database types, just so we have them defined here. So I'm going to grab this. And actually, we could just do it this way. Armor data, and I have this list alphabetically ordered, but you can order it any way you want to. And essentially what we're doing is we're mimicking the structure for the engine's database variable. So it's going to be a list, a one indexed list. So element 0 is going to be null, but a one indexed list of objects that will store data. So it's going to be matching a 1-to-1 to that engine database variable. Item, skill, state, and weapon. Okay. So after that, we come to the common settings. So these are any settings that are common to all of your plugins. So we'll say common plugin settings. So whereas this one is for specific plugin settings, so if a plugin has a particular setting, it goes into here. Say you have a setting that's based on like a global variable, say like trying to think of an example, not thinking of one. Let's say you have like as a bad example, let's say you have a global variable that's storing a boolean and it's becoming true when a specific series of switches are turned true. And you have like a list of the switch combinations that make it true. And you want to store it globally because you're using it in other parts of the plugin for various things. It's not technically a plugin parameter though. You're not adding it through this, right? So it's not a parameter from the plugin. It's strictly something internal on your plugin that's based on other data from the plugin. That's what I would consider to be a plugin setting. Something that's not coming in through your plugin parameters, but that is used for something within your plugin globally, and that would go into here instead of it would be plugin settings dot your plugin name dot the setting name, then the value for the setting. This stuff is like that, except it's settings that are common to all your plugins. So, like in my case, a lot of my plugins have scrollable windows, so the variable that turns on the scrollable windows is stored in the core plugin, like we were showing earlier, which you might not have been able to see now that I think about it, because the text size would be so small. It's like this stuff here. So obfuscation, the obfuscation character, so if we want to hide the name of a thing, we can use this to do that. The number of characters to obfuscate. So if it goes over 5 characters, any other characters after are truncated off the string. If you want to actually be obfuscating the text or not, turning it on or off, and then enable window scrolling. Those are the common settings for my core plugin. For now, we're not going to use this, but we'll set up the thing anyway. So tutorial core dot. I think this is the settings, right? Okay. So then we come to statics. So what a static is, it's essentially a variable that stores data that's not going to change. You would normally use this to handle like specific names, like for example, what I use it for, mine, is to store, turn this on, is to store database stuff. So like for example, this skill type dropdown, right? I use it to store the essentially this list. So like element 0 is none, element 1 is magic, element 2 is special. And so now I have this list of values statically defined in my core plugin, so I can use it if I need to display something in a window that has skill information. I can say, well, what skill type is it? It's one of these 3 types. When can you use it? When's the occasion that you can use it? Well, it's one of these options. And because you don't have access to this in the engine anywhere, this is all black boxed in the editor. So if you're going to be showing this data somewhere, you have to store it in your plugin. And the best way to do it is store it in the core plugin, because then you can use it in any plugin that you have that might need it. So that's what the statics is going to be for, stuff like that. We're probably not going to need it, at least not right away, but we're going to create the thing. You see the theme here. We're going to create the thing anyway for later if we need it. Static values, or variables, I guess. Let's say values. Tutorial core.statics equals an object that will be. So in my case, I have 2 different types. I have a static list and static objects. The static object is usually used to store multiple different lists, whereas the static list is just storing like a list of information like from a dropdown, whereas like the static object is a list of maybe the types, different types in the in the game, the like the ID codes for specific things dealing with trait codes. So I can say, well, if the trait code is 11 on a particular trait on a weapon, then that's going to be a elemental property. So we need to look up the elemental icons, and we can put in the elemental icon IDs into a list inside of that. And so for a value of 11, here's the icon list, and then we can go through and say, okay, for element type 3, here's the icon for that, and that's what that can be used for. Actually, list should also be an object, but it'll be an object of lists. And the properties will be actual specific things. Just looking at the definition I have over here in mind, it's actually, they're both technically objects. Alright, so what do we have after that? I believe it's now into functions. So one of the interesting properties about objects is that they can store functions within them too. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a functions property that's going to store utility functions that'll be used across multiple different plugins. And even if it's only used in one plugin, it's still a good idea to stick it in here because you might need it for some other plugin and you just don't know, right? It's easier to say, well, I might need this at some other point, so I'm going to stick it here, as opposed to saying in the future when you're working on another plugin, oh, I have this function in this other plugin, let me put it in the core plugin so I can access it from this one too. Now you have to update your core plugin, you have to update the plugin you're pulling the function from to put it into the core plugin, and then you're doing your stuff for your the current plugin you're working on. So it's just easier to develop it from the get-go to say, I'm going to call this from the core plugin and the plugin it would originally be in, instead of putting it in here and then dealing with it later. Say utility functions. So tutorial core.functions equals a object, and then we actually did have one, and that was the handling of the struct list based plugin settings from the first plugin, which we're going to put into here. So let me go grab that really fast. Alright, so we're going to put this into here. So what we have to do is you have to go tutorial core dot functions dot parse map data, and then we're going to use an arrow operator. So I talked about this a little bit before. What the arrow operator allows you to do is it's a shorthand for a function, and I think we need to do this. Ooh, this is interesting. It should just allow me to do this. Let's get JS Fiddle into the mix here. So if I have a test object that has a function called getHelloWorld, Let's see. Identifier instead sol. I'm almost certain we could do this. So I know I've done it. Let me do this. Okay. Gotcha, okay. I see where I'm doing this wrong. So, it will work. Let me just show, let's go back to this real quick. Alright, so, there we go. Then what we can do is this. Let me throw this up here in the corner, and then we'll extend this down a bit. Try and get so the camera isn't covering the output, because that's been a thing, it's been an issue in a couple videos, a couple episodes. So what we do then is console.log, we do test.get hello world, and it'll return hello world. There you go. So you can use a function within a within an object. Now, why use this arrow operator? So we could also do this. And this is also valid. Now, why you would do this for is because this has an implicit thing that it does. This allows you to essentially bind this function to the place you're calling it from, so that you can use, like, say, for example, we have this value here called. It's not going to work exactly because we don't have the right conditions, but this is what it would simulate. Let's say we have a variable called test1 val equals, we'll say a string of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And what we're going to say is and so what this allows you to do is it allows you to use this. So essentially this is the current object you're kind of working in, and the arrow operator allows you to bind it to that object, so you can use things outside of it. I think, and again, it should still work this way because we don't have the right conditions for this to not work properly. Yeah, because actually no. Here we go. Actually no, I am wrong. I am dead wrong. Here we go. So because this is technically a different scope, because this is actually, this inside of this function is a specific scope that's outside the scope of the area we're working in, right? Because this is, I don't know the proper way to describe it, but essentially the this that's here is this. It's the test, right? Test object. Like if we put in a thing here called test1 val and said 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 and ran this, you would get it because in the context and the scope of test val 1 is that. Now, if we go back to the other way, actually, I wonder what happens in this case. Does it take the local scope or the global scope? I actually don't know what the answer is here. Okay, global. So the global overrides the local. So as you can see now, this allows us to pull in the actual value we want. So this is a practical example of what the arrow operator does. It also allows you to shorthand function names, so you can actually more easily write functions in certain contexts. Like if you're doing a specific thing like a filter, you can write a function to actual function within the filter property to do specific things. There's a thing called a reduce. We're not going to use that now, but it's kind of an add-on to filters and finds. It allows you to only get specific values out of the data that you're pulling in. So it allows you to get a limited data set from the data you get back from those to different functions, list functions. and it uses this notation to make the function definition a lot easier to read. Okay, yeah, I didn't know we were going to be doing the arrow operator on this one, but we are. So there you go. Yeah, I didn't know this would actually work or not. So cool. I'm glad that that actually was a working example. So in this case, we're going to do it, even though technically we probably don't need to. Because everything is stored inside of the plugin, the tutorial core thing, so we can access it from itself. But if there was ever a situation where we would need something from the global variable that's not in the plugin settings and any of the setting properties in the tutorial core for some reason, which wouldn't exist in this case because we actually have it built in, everything built in, then we could get it using this with the arrow operator being the part of the function definition. Wait, what? I shouldn't have to do... No, it should be fine. Oh, because it's not actually in the... Okay, yeah, it's not in the context. We're not setting it up in the context of an object. We're creating a property and then assigning a value to it. So we actually use equals there, not the colon. Yeah, okay. So in this case, we're taking in a data string from wherever we're calling this from, and that data string is being processed through this. So we're going to actually have to say tutorial core.functions.parseMapData, so it calls itself again. And this is that recursive function that then will, keep processing the data and then return the entire parsed data array back to data list back to wherever it got called from. We will be needing to use this later on, so we're going to put it in now. And that's really the only utility function I think we need. I think we also have some other functions potentially that we have defined here. I think it's actually they're defined as different sections of functions, but they're all within the function object itself in my core plugin. Okay, so after we have this, then we have our aliases for the core plugin. So these are things that are not necessarily part of a utility function class. They're going to actually be functions stored in the core plugin itself, that the core plugin will use. So we're going to say core plugins, core plugin functions. Actually, let me do the proper... Actually, I've been doing the proper thing here. It should be... I like to do the block notations because it looks a bit more fancy than just doing a single code like that. So I should change the other ones too. And then we're going to do aliases. So what we're going to be doing here for aliases is we're going to be aliasing a couple different things. One of them is going to be the make save contents function. This is the function in the data manager that allows you to save your game data. We're going to be aliasing the extract save contents function, which is what allows you to load data into the game. And we're also going to be aliasing the isDatabaseLoaded function, which essentially is a check to see if the database is loaded yet, so that once the database is finished loading, we can then do our parsing of the notetag data. So those are the three different functions we'll be using from Data Manager, as well as Data Manager functions. So we're going to have another section for Data Manager. Alright, and as I described in the episode before when we went through and made our initial aliases for that, we're going to do the same thing here. So we have a var. It's going to be the name of our handle. In this case, since our handle is tutorial plugin, the handle that you're going to be using is going to be this first part of the plugin name. So whatever you're going to be developing plugins underneath, whatever handle, that would go there. In our case, it's going to be tutorial plugin. Then we're going to do an underscore, then the class name, so data manager, then underscore in the function name. In this case, that's going to be make save contents. Now, the reason why I'm using underscores here, along with the camel casing, is just because I want to, instead of having one huge long name, I want to make specifically certain that I understand what's going on. So this is the handle, this is the class name, and this is the function name. And those are very distinct, separated out by these underscores, so I know what exactly we're working with. Like, we could just do this, right? But then you have this pretty long name, and it, you know, if you read through it, you can understand what it is. You know, plugin, tutorial plugin, data manager, make save contents. Kind of, you know, if you know what you're looking at, right? If you know the data manager is a class, then you know that's the class name. If you know that make save contents is the function name, and that's a function of data manager, then you understand what this actually is. I just think it's a lot more readable to do it this way. It is kind of a inconsistency, but all the aliases will be consistently named this way, so it's a consistent inconsistency. How's that for a paradox? So for this, then we're going to have data manager dot make save contents. Okay. Then, so what that's going to do is it's going to store the original version of the make save contents function in our variable. So our variable now contains that make save contents function. The reason we need to do that is because we're going to override that now with our own code, but we need to have the original version to call so that we can run the original code and then add in our additional code. Because we don't want to rewrite the entire thing. We just want to add in what we want to do and use the existing function code to then do what the function normally would do. So the purpose of an alias is to allow you to do that without actually modifying the original code. So if you didn't use an alias, you would have to go to the database, the RPG manager class or file. So if you go over to here really fast, I'll show you what that means. So it's in the JS file. Then you have these files here. Let me do this. So what these files are is these are RPG Maker's JavaScript files. This is where all the RPG Maker coding is located. So you'd have to go into RPG Managers, which is where the data manager is at. And then you would need to go find data manager. So we just do find go data manager dot make save or prototype, or not prototype, just make save contents. And what you would then do is you'd add in your stuff for your plugin into this, and you would just modify it directly. Problem with that is that if somebody else is modifying this as well in their plugin files, you're going to override each other because you have to, the developer will have to take the modified RPG Managers file and copy it into their project, right? You don't want to do that because then you go into the problems. The developer has to then go in and merge the stuff together. Very bad habit to do. The only time you should ever modify an existing file, one of these files, and I would say that even then you shouldn't, but if you wanted to, the only time you should do it is when you're adding something entirely new. Like say you're adding in a new class or a new class into like RPG objects that's doing specific stuff, you know. Like in my case, I did that with my advanced weapon plugin. I created a game instance weapon class that was stored inside of the RPG objects JS file. I later moved that into my plugin file because I realized that it was just too much to ask for people to overwrite their RPG object file, and in some cases, the version of the file that I had might not be the same as their version because there might have been changes from updates to RPG Maker over the years. So it's really dangerous to do that. Just give them a file to overwrite and instructing them how to copy and paste the code in to make it work in their version of their RPG Maker RPG object file was a little bit too much to ask. So very, very specific limited circumstances where you'd ever modify this file or any of these files, and even then you really don't have to, because you can just put it into your plugin file. So but that's an option. If you were just writing a plugin for yourself, you're not going to release it, and you just want to go in and modify the existing RPG Maker code instead of writing plugin files for everything, you could go in and modify the actual engine code here in these files and make your changes to it. Perfectly fine. But if you're going to be releasing it for people to use, you should never do that. And it's just a really good habit to get into, not doing it, even if you're just doing it for your own game. Because if you have to turn something off, you can't. Once you make a change in here, it's there permanently. So if you're trying to debug an issue with another plugin that you're using, if it's like a third-party plugin, and you think it's a problem with one of your things that you've done, you can't turn your stuff off because it's coded into the engine now. You have to go in and replace your version of the engine file with one that doesn't have your code in. Whereas if you were just put it into a plugin, you could go into the plugin manager in the editor and turn your plugin off, and then run the playtest and determine whether or not your plugin was the issue. So it's just a really bad habit to modify the files directly, but you can do it if you want to. I just highly advise against it. Okay, so we have that now. We're going to essentially redefine and change the code for this now. Data manager dot prototype dot make save contents equals function. You're going to pass the parameter called contents. Alright. Now, you want to have everything that's... Well, it depends on what you want to do. Normally what you would do is you let the existing code run first, then do your stuff. Sometimes you want to go the other way and do stuff for your things and then make the code run. It depends on the situation, right? And the specific thing you are doing. Like, if this was something handling, say, opening a window and then how a certain thing should be displayed based on a condition, I would say write in your code to like set the condition or get the condition, and then run the existing code that you're modifying through the alias. Normally, though, you would go run the existing code and then run your modified code. So the way you would do that, though, is by using either apply or call. Now, I talked about this before as well. They both do generally the same thing. It's just that when you use apply, you can essentially pass through an arguments list that has all the arguments that the function will need, and then the apply essentially allows the function to break that out into the constituent parts. Whereas if you use a call, it's only going to take this parameter. So it refers back to essentially itself. In this case, since we're passing an argument through, we want to use the apply here. Is that actually right? What I have over here, I mean. That is right, but I'm wondering now if my plugin is coded correctly. Wait, what happened to the... Oh, never mind. I'm thinking about extract save contents. Never mind. We'll get to that in a second. Let's just do this one first. So what we're going to do is... what we want to do is we want to store our plugin data in this. So what we're going to do is we're first going to call the existing function, which is going to return a property value called contents. And actually, we're not going to have anything passed down. I was looking at the wrong function. We'll need that for the next one. But so we're going to have a contents variable that's going to get returned from this, and we're going to say tutorial for our tutorial plugin underscore data manager save contents. We're going to say .call, and then we're going to pass through this. So that will call the version of the function that we saved. So the initial version, the original version, that'll do its thing. It will return the make save contents to here. So what'll happen is whatever this is called from now, it's going to call this function in our plugin first. That's going to call the original version of this. And then it's going to do what the original version did. And then it's going to return the value that it sends back, which is going to be the contents, which will have all the normal engine data that would be saved on a save in it. And then we add in our stuff to it. So we're going to add in contents dot. So we want to save the, we want to have the core, so we want to actually create the core object to save. So we're going to basically say tutorial core again here, because we're adding it to the data. And then we're going to save in our, so I'm saving plugins, plugin data, note tag data, database data. I guess because we want to store the current state of the game. I guess, yeah. So we're going to create all these objects then. So contents dot tutorial core dot plugins equals. Let's grab this and we'll copy those down a bit. So yeah, plugins, we have plugin data. Yeah, plugin data, notetag data. And we have plugin database data. Then we're going to have a function to get the plugin database data. Actually, no, not this, because we're going to be dealing with, that would make it a data manager thing. We don't want to do that. This is going to be a plugin function that we're calling from here. Then we need to do the assignment for the other things. So we're going to grab all this and this, and then they're going to assign everything here. So tutorial core.plugins. Tutorial core dot plugin data, tutorial core dot plugin note tag data. Okay. And then we so the functions that call this function, this make save contents function, expect to get a value returned to them. That's why we get the contents returned from the original function. So we have to return the contents to that function from here, just to make sure it continues the way it's supposed to. So return contents. All right, so there's that one. Let's just go ahead and create a new. Well, we'll wait till we get down below because we're gonna have all the data manager functions together here. So next thing up we need to do is extract contents. So to load the save file. So var tutorial plugin. Data manager extract save contents. All right, and then data manager dot prototype dot extract save contents equals function, then content. All right, so now in this case, we need to, and this one we actually do need to do the call with the apply, because then that's going to, oh, not prototype, right, not prototype. So Right, okay, yeah. So we have to do this because we want to call the function to then essentially fill all these variables with the data from the save file, which you can't really see, so I'll do this real fast. So these are this is the contents, which is our save file. And we're pulling out all the global game variable data from that save file to load into there. So we're going to do that, then we're going to load in our own stuff from the save file for the plugin, core plugin. So that's what is happening here. I was just looking to see if we actually had to return anything or not, and we don't. So I want to make sure this is all still correct. So first off, we got to go tutorial plugin, data manager, extract save contents, dot apply this, and then arguments. So arguments will essentially pass through whatever's in the function up here. Will get passed through in arguments. Now that'll do its thing. It'll come back. So the database data will be loaded into the plugin or the engine variables. Now we need to do stuff for ours. So we're going to call a function called load core data to handle that. And we're going to pass through. So I'd actually, let me see, load core data. Oh, I missed one specific step. Actually, we probably don't even need this. We could just do, I did this for the sake of whatever. We don't really need that. I'd like a temporary parameter to store data to load in with, but we don't really need that. I'm not sure why I did it that way. We can just pass the contents to that. So we have that. Then we're going to have, once that's done, process plugin database data. And then we're going to have clear plugin database data. What does it actually do? Do I need that? So process plugin database data. Oh yeah, here we go. That is what's going on with those particular ones. I'm using them to store data from the actual database data, right? So if it's a new record, I think what we're doing is on the processing. Let's see. So we're calling get plugin database data. So on specific ones like, say, plugin. So for like this one's for my magic crafting plugin. After a certain specific ID that's part of a plugin setting, that's all going to be custom skills that you've created, that you've crafted. So I essentially get every skill that has a skill ID greater than that value. So I know that that's a particular thing. Otherwise, it's going to be just an empty list because we're not doing anything with them at the moment. So these particular database data value properties are just to store the plugin created data from the database, so we can store it separately from the database and then load it back in. So that because what happens is that if you the plugin data. The data from the database gets reloaded from the database specifically. It doesn't get saved, right? Because that's a lot of data to save. And all that's stored inside of a JSON file, essentially. Which essentially is, it's, converted to a string, and then it gets reparsed when it gets loaded. So if we were to load in this stuff on whatever point, it has the potential of getting overwritten or being incorrect. Or getting screwed around with. So it's just easier to store this stuff separately and away from it, and not have to store the entire database, in the save file, and then just load those back in at the specific point that we need to, which is what that's for. Again, in this case, we're not going to use that because We're not going to be changing any database data or creating new records, but we might in the future. So we're not gonna technically do that right now, though. Let's see. Extract save contents. Make save contents. Oh, duh. My brain is like starting to turn to mush. Not even time. What time even is it? 10 o'clock. Okay. Well, 10 o'clock after running on 10 o'clock running on 4 hours of sleep. Surprised that I'm still cogent enough to even do this video, to be honest. Okay, so I went a little bit too far down. Here we go. So then clear, yeah, so into clear. So what this is gonna do, it's gonna clear out those properties and we don't, those database properties, we don't need them anymore. Okay. And then that's done, this function's done. So next up we have database loaded, so we have there tutorial plugin underscore database manager, and then is database loaded. This will allow us to determine whether or not the database has been loaded, and then we can do our notetag stuff. And actually, this is not prototype. I've been putting prototype on these. We don't need to. These are not prototypes. These are static functions.